You're listening to the Veteran Etc. podcast, as there's always more to be said about a veteran. Join your host, Mike Kim, a veteran, ex-monk, seasoned war trauma therapist, and writer, as he shares his years of research in veteran readjustment culture and the meaning of warrior life. Now, here's your host, Mike Kim.
Veteran Etc. This is a show focused on veteran daily lives, not just the artifacts of the veteran reality like books, magazines, movies, but more on how veterans connect with themselves and with the larger society. I'm proud to have on this episode Anela Arcari. Anela has a wealth of knowledge in regards to, hey, if you want to know anything about combat engineers, Army engineers, I thought it was my cousin. And yeah, you have my cousin, Richard Castillo, but we have someone else with immense knowledge in regards to the world of Army engineering. And we have this incredible guest, and we're just going to chit chat, chop it up, powwow, talk about life, and also not just Army engineering, but the different things regarding veteran readjustment, wellness. She's had like an experience of 28 plus years in the military, being a published author, also like offering, her guidance as a Army TAC officer at the illustrious West Point Military Academy. And I must say, someone who I favor because she's a graduate of Norwich University, trying to be like General Russell Todd. So enough of me. We'll turn it over to you. And if you can give anything that I left out regarding your background, because I'm such a fan, please share with us.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. I happen to have been born into a military family, and so that really, got me started, on this path of serving in the military. I really enjoyed the opportunity to travel with my dad's career. It was a lot of fun. Found myself at a military college, looking to find a way to become a second lieutenant in the United States Army, and then started my own career, which did involve, a lot of travel as well. Maybe not to all the same garden spots he went to, but but certainly got a chance to go and do a lot of amazing things.
Can I just ask you, because it just seems as though, gosh, 28 years, and if you could just say just some of the different places or the interesting things, because what's really interesting with you, much like me, we don't just have military experience from the immediate war on terror, right? Like, there are other things and other events and other hostile areas and war zones that came about, prior to the war on terror. And can we just get like a glance?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, certainly as a child, it was the Cold War. I mean, I was living in West Germany, and I went to East Berlin, right? And those things don't exist now. And then certainly in
East Berlin.
I'm sorry?
So you were like near East Berlin?
Well, I was able to walk from West Berlin into East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie as a child.
Wow. As a child. Wow. And was it scary? I mean,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It was two things right up front. One, it was extremely scary because there were lots of what I remember very young looking soldiers with weapons that were in some cases pointed towards us, not at Checkpoint Charlie, but around that space. And the other thing that I distinctly remember was every American should come and stand here and look over this wall and see what it means to not be free. And that really stuck with me as a young child. Mm-hmm. I was in like third or fourth grade when I had that opportunity, and so yes, so that certainly, at a very young age, was an exposure to life that is outside of the United States, and the freedoms that we experience on, on a day-to-day basis, and probably the beginning of my unbelievable gratitude that I am an American, and I have the privilege that I have as being an American. And then certainly in my own career, my, I guess, actual assignments were beautiful. I was in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. But from there, went to Somalia, went to Haiti. Then my second assignment, Germany, not a bad location. Went from there to Tazar, Hungary, which was, a unique experience in and of itself. And then later on, also from great locations, went to Kuwait and Afghanistan. For longer periods of time. So yes, a little bit of that war on terror and a lot of humanitarian type missions as well.
I was in tactical civil affairs also. I mean, I was, I've pretty much gotten every MOS except being an Air Force cook, which maybe eventually, if they let me, I'll do it. But like, I was, in the Marine Corps. I was, even in the Vermont National Guard, but I was always intrigued by combat engineers. At Norwich, I would say like my best, well, I don't know, besides my roommate, Chris Toulouse, my other best friend was like August Buhalis. He goes by August Murray, now, but he was a combat engineer, and so I was always interested in like, yeah, just like engineering. I was a big military history guy under Nick Pappas, Professor Nick Pappas. And so, he'd always talk about like Roman engineering. And then when I did the spiritual pilgrimage of Camino de Santiago before I became a monk, I would see remnants of like these Roman bridges, these small Roman bridges, and like 2,000 years old,
Right,
not
stood the
older.
test of time.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, what, as far as your understanding of like engineering and military engineering, is like really interesting. Like when you were doing these different civil military operations, what types of projects? Like we got into like water projects that we knew made a difference, sanitation that would make a difference, in a village and improve the morale. What were some of the different things? I was involved in like healthcare, and set up, a airlift program for kids into India. But what kind of things? Because it's just amazing to know about your background.
Sure. As a lieutenant, I did mostly base camp construction, and we kind of jokingly refer to it as cookbook, because you kind of like step one, clear the field. Step two, step three. There's sort of a real easy, very rudimentary. I always joke we didn't build any Taj Mahals, right? We just went in and got something on the ground so that our soldiers aren't sleeping on the ground. Very simple, like put in some wooden floors into a canvas tent, run a little electricity so that they have a light to turn on when they come into it. Helped with, putting together dining facilities and the bathrooms and the showers and those kinds of things, the walkways in between. But really, as a lieutenant and even as a company commander, the soldiers that I had were considered construction soldiers. So not the combat engineering soldiers that have the, C4 to go and blow up things or mines or things like that. We had hammers and nails and wood, and
That's
we
part,
built.
yeah. Well, that's part of combat engineering. It's done in a zone and all that. But yeah, so that's really interesting. So what I know you were in Haiti, and so there's like an issue of a cornfield or something. Could you share with people
Yeah,
some of that? That was fun, kind of interesting.
it was really an amazing opportunity for me from the perspective of, I was no longer the platoon leader at that point. I was the executive officer. So I got to manage all of the equipment being shipped from Colorado Springs all the way to Haiti. And ironically, based on how we went into Haiti, some may remember that President Carter played a role in us not sort of taking it by force, but actually being able to go in peacefully. But because we thought we were going to take it by force, our equipment arrived in Haiti and we saw it on TV before we actually left Fort Carson. And so by the time we got there, we were ready to roll and get going. And our first task was to build a base camp. And when we landed, the night we landed, we were dropped off literally at a cornfield. And they were like, you're going to turn this cornfield into a 6,000 soldier base camp. Go. And amazingly enough, it was an entire battalion's worth of equipment. In 69 days, we left. And we had left behind a 6,000 soldier base camp that we built from that cornfield. So yeah, it was the first time where I really kind of got to see it from start to finish. And it was really just an amazing opportunity to see what we are capable of doing, and from getting the equipment there and knocking out that base camp. It was it was just a great experience.
Wow. So let me ask you this. Going to Norwich, did you majored in engineering?
I did. I have a degree in civil engineering.
Oh, and did you find, and that's one of America's, first places where you would study civil engineering, is at Norwich. And so do you feel that it actually helped you in your military career, going to Norwich and studying civil engineering?
Absolutely. I think probably more than sort of like the technical aspects of being a civil engineer, what I felt helped me the most is this real simple, disciplined way of solving problems. If nothing else, and I think that's probably true of any engineering degree, right? We're about solving problems, getting these interesting and intricate, complex things that need to be done, and how do you build it? How do you organize it? How do you make this machine do what you want it to do, kind of thing. And so I think beyond any technical, like structural engineering or hydrology, any of that, I learned how to solve problems, and I learned how to do it almost innately because it was so repetitive. And I look at things and can see not only the ending, like what needs to happen, but I can also see like what's going to happen if I go this route versus like the second and third order effects. And I really contribute the engineering degree to that, like being able to do that as quickly and as easily as I am able to.
Wow, impressive. Now, so I get a little bit confused because my cousin was a combat engineer. Also, he was in the Army Corps of Engineers in Kosovo in the 90s. And I just never understood, maybe I should, and I'm admitting it now because I think I know everything. But I was just wondering if you could share with folks, what's the distinction? Because I know Army Corps of Engineers has been around for a long time, and I just wonder if you could share some things as far as the distinctions.
Sure, absolutely. A lot of folks maybe only know one aspect of it. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for all of the waterways within the United States. So if you think of one of our larger rivers like the Mississippi that has several locks and dams on it, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are regulating and operating those locks and dams. So from that perspective, a lot of folks are like, oh, I know the Army Corps of Engineers, they've got this dam that they built, that helps with flood mitigation. And there's also a recreational area. So we also have rangers that are part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So there's a sort of whole civilian side of the Corps of Engineers, and it's actually broken down by watersheds. So if you look at a drop of rain and where it goes when it lands, that's sort of the boundaries that create what I call more the civilian side of the Corps of Engineers. Now you've also got your military side of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, those combat engineers that we've talked about, the construction engineers. We have units that can build bridges. We have specialty units that just clear mines or just set mines or, clear obstacles and create obstacles. That's along the lines of the combat engineering. And then the base camp builders, the construction engineers that can come in with big like scrapers and dozers, and we can make a parking lot or a new road or an airfield, all those kinds of things. So we are extremely diverse in that respect. And over like the command of that is a 3-star general, the chief of engineers, and he has both. He oversees and understands both the military side and this sort of civilian side, and so it is a very broad mission with an extreme amount of different types of projects, and it's global. For instance, in my current position, so after serving on active duty for 28 years, I was then recruited to come on as a Department of the Army civilian. And I am still working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I happen to be part of the North Atlantic Division. Well, the North Atlantic Division, the boundaries of it are from Maine to Norfolk on the East Coast. So that whole sort of East Coast seaboard side, and all of Europe and all of Africa. So it is a very large area that the commander is responsible for. And he has 6 subordinate commanders that, have smaller portions of that. So it's not like he's doing this by himself, right? So that's just an example of sort of the civilian side of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh, fantastic. And yeah, that helps kind of know a little bit about the military that a lot of people aren't aware of. And yeah, and I wanted to ask you, so since you started being in the military and also coming from a military family, so seeing, many different periods, generations of military life, have you noticed like what are like the major differences that you notice from the military then and now? Feel free, this isn't, political or anything, but just more like a socio-cultural kind of like question.
Sure. I did grow up in a military family, and my father said to me that he belonged to the brown shoe army because when he joined the military, their shoes were brown. And they had the, sort of World War II pinks and greens era uniform. And as I was retiring from the United States Army, they chose to go back to the brown shoes and the pinks and greens uniform. And so I think some of it would be the more things change, the more they stay the same. So that might be one of the answers that I would give you. But the other thing that he pointed out to me often was he came into a military that was drafted, and I came into an all volunteer army. So that was a pretty significant difference, right? From how he led and who he led, and how I led and who I led. And so, from that perspective, I think there's pros and cons to both, right? You could make an argument both ways. But certainly the folks that came to me for the most part, and some were, I think voluntold from the perspective of stay out of jail, go into the military kind of, aspect, so there were still, I think, the same leadership challenges for both, groups. But I'd say another, I think, real significant difference was the relationship between officers and non-commissioned officers in the Army. My father grew up in an era where they really didn't interact all that much. I mean, certainly at work they did, but it was always, very professional and not very personal. There wasn't a lot of personal
Was he a West Point graduate?
No, he went through ROTC from an engineering school, Worcester Polytech Institute.
Which VPI? What?
WPI.
WPI. Yeah, great, awesome. And then what did you notice? So then that enlisted officer divide, he kind of noticed was pronounced, and then
Yeah, he noticed when I came on board, there was much more familiarity. I don't know what the
yeah,
right term, but he would never have considered having a non-commissioned over officer to his house. But if I had a unit function, I had my NCOs and my soldiers, and that was okay, and so he was really surprised. And at the time when I first joined, there were no real set rules about women and men, officer, enlisted, dating, marrying it. And so that was really surprising to him. He's like, wait a second, there's a second lieutenant who's married to a sergeant first class. Like that was surprising to him. We've since changed those rules. But when I first came on, that that was a big thing that he pointed out to me. Things
Sure.
that didn't change, our non-commissioned officers are the backbone of our military. They make it run. Without them, yes, obviously it takes leaders, and they are phenomenal leaders of their own right. And so he, always talked to me about that, and that did not, in any way, shape, or change, except that I think we might have been a little closer because there was that, that little difference from when he was like, no, the two shall not, socialize.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And then your take on how women, I mean, so Norwich, I mean, I look at the pictures and everything nowadays of like Norwich, and it's like, yeah, it's just like much more multicultural. Not that, like it was like a major issue, but definitely in numbers, women, I see them, at
True.
Norwich with the pictures as far as like, on their sleeves. Not that I was really like into rank or anything, but I did notice, that they had like a lot of rank and in interesting positions, like on the rescue team and all that,
Right.
cold weather roles, big up there, and just other things, sports, all that. But like, did you notice have you noticed anything in the military that's different in regards to women nowadays than maybe when you first joined, or even when you noticed like being part of a military family, or all three?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in reference to Norwich, I came from an all-girls Catholic high school into Norwich University. So it was a very eye-opening experience from the perspective of being such a minority, right? And it taught me really quickly to be completely at ease with being the only woman in a classroom, or the only woman at a meeting, or the only woman at at the table, that I did absolutely bring on to active duty. I would be sitting in a meeting for like 45 minutes, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm the only woman, because I just didn't walk into the room identifying as the woman. I just walked into the room as identifying as the soldier. But it definitely helped me to just be completely at ease, regardless of what situation, I was in. Certainly from the time that I came on active duty until the time that I retired, so much opened up. And it was really exciting to watch the first women graduate from Ranger School, and to find that when I got out of Norwich, I actually put field artillery down as one of my options, and was told, oh, I'm sorry, we only assess women every other year into the field artillery. And now that's not the case, right? Every year, all positions open to women. So that's been very exciting to see, more and more trails open up, and then more and more women blaze those trails as the first to go out and do that. So definitely significant changes from when I first joined until now. And I think that it's been there's been a shift around like being and looking feminine in uniform. I feel like when I first came on board, there wasn't a lot of femininity amongst the women who joined the military. We were feminine, but we didn't necessarily look it. And I feel like that shifted over time, and I'm happy to see that shift.
Just look at
Yeah.
TikTok, folks. Also, Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's an important aspect, right? We all bring our own unique things to the
Yeah.
world, and I think that that's important. And I was counseled very young, that another woman pulled me aside, and she's like, "Don't be afraid to look feminine and be feminine, because your young female soldiers are going to be looking to you to kind of see what are you modeling for them." And so I tried to keep that in place. And a lot of times I got, this kind of, "You're in the military? Like, you don't look like you're in the military." And I'd be like, "Well, what should I look like?" So that definitely changed over time, I feel, for the
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. These are definitely very noticeable, and I just think important, and whatever, the bottom line, I think, and you might think this way too, but essentially it's your character and your service, and all these other things there, gosh, I just think because the military has always been like a, a leader, and I've shifted some of my research at Columbia to looking at diversity. I just studying like the history, it's just like amazing as far as how the US military, not perfectly, but in many ways a certain level of high adaptability in kind
Mhm.
of making certain changes to
Sure.
kind of like open up this whole thing of service, right? That essentially we need to create more and more domains where people can serve, as
Right.
they are, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty great. And then, like, what I also find interesting in your background is that you have a counseling degree, and it's also tied to the military. I wanted to get a little bit of information regarding that.
Sure. So interestingly enough, I was selected to be a tactical officer at the United States Military Academy. And in simple terms, I kind of say a guidance counselor, right? I was the bridge between what is it like to be a cadet to become a second lieutenant. So that bridge in between there. And in order to serve in that position, the Army sent me to school to get a degree that they determined, which degree it was. And so it was a Master of Science in Education with leadership development and counseling as, the focused areas. And it really was a great sort of coming home to a certain extent, because I really loved my psychology class in high school, and I really loved my psychology class at Norwich. I took it as an elective, and I remember telling my dad as I was getting my master's degree, I'm like, maybe I should have been a psychologist or gone into that field. And he's like, you always really enjoyed that. So it was nice to be able to combine my very technical, very problem solving, engineering mind and degree with this sort of more touchy-feely, I'm a people person and I like
Humanistic, not touchy-feely, because that's my field. And I'm not touchy-feely.
humanistic, not touchy-feely, humanistic.
Humanistic. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. There's also touchy-feely. It's okay. I'm in touch with it. I got to
compared
do more
compared to
sweat.
engineering, right?
Yeah, compared to engineering, definitely compared to engineering.
Humanistic, I like it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just kidding. I need a couple more sweat lodges to go through. So, to get, yeah. So,
But
yeah,
so anyway,
yeah.
yeah, because of that assignment, I had an opportunity to go down that path and explore that more.
Let me ask you, how did you find, because at Norwich we didn't have TAC officers, right? So what were like the distinctions, right? Because you're like, very aware of like, this military college kind of environment without a TAC officer. The Corps runs itself. That's Norwich is like saying,
Right.
versus West Point Corps of Cadets, where it has TAC officers over cadet officers, cadet student officers that kind of administers their Corps of Cadets. They have TAC officers. What would you say are some distinctions?
For sure. It was challenging from the perspective at West Point where I was dual hatted. I was the legal commander of that unit. So if one of those cadets got in trouble, I administered the Article 15 against them. And so there was not that level at Norwich, right? So there was that aspect. And then I was also this counselor, right? I had a coach, teach, mentor. I had gone to school to get this degree. But unfortunately, the vast majority of them saw me as the legal commander. So if I invited them to my office just to get to know them, it was automatically, what did I do wrong? Right? So there was only a small amount. I had approximately 122 cadets that were in my company. And there was only a small amount, maybe 10%, that took on the counseling, the coaching, the teaching aspect of it, and sought me out more as a mentor than the disciplinarian. But I certainly was given all of the tools to do both. So yeah, I think from that perspective, looking at Norwich, we had a lot of autonomy, right? And there's goodness and some not so goodness in that, right? Especially I know you with ceremonial company. There's,
me creating my own
some
uniforms.
shenanigans that
Me creating my own uniforms, and all of that, and yeah, that may be a good or bad depending on where you come from, but also these other issues that right, like that need to be regulated, like alcohol, at least back then. And I'm sure it's interesting that even Bill Wilson from AA, who went to Norwich, said that his first real experiences with alcohol were like at Norwich. And so that's where I think someone like you could have been beneficial, right, for like the different line companies. And I'm sure you did a great job while you were at West Point in that. And what would you say is something that you could give future cadets either going to West Point or going to Norwich or VMI, or parents of those? Like what kind of advice can you kind of give, because you see it from many different levels, right? Like from a counseling level, from a legal, from a being a cadet yourself, to all these different hats tied to military college education. What are some things that you can kind of provide information?
I think probably the greatest lesson that I had, both as a cadet and then I coached and taught and mentored, the cadets at West Point around, was this idea of leading your peers. In the military, there's not really going to be a time where you are, in close friendship with people who you might be studying with, and you might on the weekends go and party with and hang out with, like in the case of West Point, go into the city, New York City, and have a nice weekend and come back. And then the very next day have to go in and inspect their room, inspect their uniform, make sure that they're doing all the things that they need to do. That's tough for a teenager and a young adult to kind of balance between this friendship and this leadership position. And so some of the best advice that I got, and some of the best advice I feel I give, is this idea around, if you can master leading your peers, I'm telling you, everything else after that is going to be really easy, because you will have made those tough, the hard right over the easy wrong more than once when it comes to a friend of yours, right?
You may need to write a tipping point for the military, Anela. I mean, that's like very important. I think that's something, to kind of like look at mastering in a Corps of Cadets type of environment.
It's one of the best lessons to be learned. And I feel very strongly that when you are put in that position and you triumph over it, then any other gray possible issue that you come against as you're going forward, you at least are like, oh, I had a time where it was tough, and I really had to, choose that hard right over that easy wrong, because it was my best friend,
Yes. Yes. I remember at Norwich, I took a break and I went for a year and I was part of a Marine Special Operations Capable Unit. And I came back. I think maybe that's when you were a freshman. And so I was like behind in my
Okay.
class. So they didn't know where to put me in ceremonial
Mm,
company, but I was
mm.
with someone who's not, did not end up being my roommate and one of my closest friends, Chris Luce. But I noticed the honor code violation, and like you said, I was in a jam because the guy was on scholarship, and so that meant the jeopardy, meant jeopardizing his scholarship and his dream of being, like, I believe his father was, in the military and expected it so much. And so that was one of, gosh, what you said was very important, and it led me later on. In the military, I had to be a whistleblower, and things worked out there, but it was very difficult to do that. But turning him in, but to make sure that the honor committee would not intervene, like I made it clear, I said I wouldn't release the name unless you can guarantee me that you could scare them, but not jeopardize the scholarship, because I didn't feel it was that. I learned from Aristotle, right, that proportionality, that law also has context to it. And I'm sure that's what you studied, as, this legal TAC officer, or TAC officer with legal responsibilities. But gosh, it's just an amazing thing that you said that. We can have a whole show on that in the future. So
Mm.
I just think if you have parents if there are parents listening, or if there are kids that want to be cadets in the future, it's my son. Don't believe the hype. No, I'm just kidding. It's my son. Believe it all and ask me later, 20 years from now. But anyway, gosh, that's such a great wealth of knowledge that you bring. And I want to find out, how did all of this, because I know that all of this um, humanistic type of work, and not like humanistic as far as anti-religion, but more like humanism as far as looking at the mind and wellness and the human condition. How have you been able to integrate that? Because I understand you've had, like, the published work and then the other work. I just wanted to find out, like, what that all led you to.
Sure. So I think I can have considered myself a lifelong seeker for a long time. Just this idea that um, there is more, and I don't know what the right, more consciousness. There's more than sort of what meets the eye. I just have always been curious about whatever you want to call it, God, universe, spirit, but just there's more. There's something out there, and I wanted to understand it better. And so through lots of different readings and such, I came to a point where I was getting ready to retire from the military. And I knew that it was going to be a significant emotional event for me. I didn't appreciate this significant amount of grieving that was going to happen as a result of my retiring from the military. And I say grieving because I was born into it, and then I went into it. So for the first 50 years of my life, up until my 10th birthday, which is when I got my ID card, I was a card carrying member of the United States military, right? And so, and I was not going to lose the card. It was going to change to a color I wasn't happy about, but I was, leaving the military. I was not going to be putting on a uniform anymore. Something I had started when I was 14, because I went to a private high school and a private college, still wearing a uniform. And then I joined the military. I knew I needed some help. And so, interestingly enough, I asked, and the next day I got an email, and it said, "Are you looking for a miracle?" And I was like, "Yes, actually I am." And I joined this year-long program. And through that year-long program, I discovered a teacher who taught me meditation and she taught me a breathing meditation. And and I also, through that same program, which was the main reason I joined it, had a life coach that I met with almost
Let
every 2
me
weeks.
stop you here before you
Absolutely.
go on. How do you think veterans can learn from the meditation, the life coach, the practice, the three things that you kind of mentioned? How do you think in veteran readjustment, how do you think these things can be like instrumental?
Huge, huge. The particular breathing meditation that I mentioned has significant amounts of research dealing specifically with veterans and PTS and mitigating it just from doing breathing 20 minutes a day. They have a whole, the particular ashram and foundation that I work with has a whole welcome home portion of their program where they just teach veterans.
What is it called?
It's I want to get you the right term, and I know welcome home is in it,
Okay,
but
good.
I don't
Who
remember the entire thing.
who is it? I know, I had some
Sure, the
experience
Art of
in
Living
India.
Foundation.
Yeah.
If you Google the Art of Living Foundation
Okay. Okay,
and
good.
veterans,
Yeah,
you
good.
would find this program. And so and probably a little bit more research, the research that goes with it, and the real positive effects that it is having. And that's just the breathing part of it. There's also research on the meditation and how it really calms the monkey mind, the
Yeah.
chatter, that we all have. Everybody has it, right? There's a lot of research around, and my meditation happens to be a mantra-based meditation, but there are many types of meditation. And I only recently discovered that they can be linked to how you learn. So if you're visual, you can stare at a candle flame and go into a meditative state because you're visual, right? And if you're auditory, then this mantra meditation probably will help you. And if you are kinesthetic and you move, there are also like conscious movement meditations. So it's not one size fits all, like everything else, right? There's lots of different modalities, and they're all showing a lot of promise in working with veterans and some of the traumas that they've been through.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's great that, you shared a few words on that. And then how would you say, and I'm not presuming whether you went through counseling or whatever, but how would you say, but you studied counseling, how would you say there's the distinctions between receiving a life coach and maybe counseling? Because I know the VA has also expanded. I know the Manhattan VA has a life coach present, and I'm not sure if it's been incorporated, the life coach, into every VA hospital, but I did notice that. So what can you say? And I at Columbia have been tied to the executive coaching courses with Dr. Terrence Maltiba, and I just find it really great, in that there's this thing that is available, and to look at kind of like to be listened, to be heard, and also to explore maybe not like problems that are vast, but just kind of like hiccups that can be kind of like taken care of, that are serious but can be taken care of through like coaching. What again, that's coming from maybe the executive coaching, but please share some words on that.
Yeah, there are lots of different perspectives on this, but one of the, I guess, simplest ways that I've kind of wrangled with it is the counseling that I received was more about sort of the present moment and what I might have been going through in that moment. And the coaching that I've received has been a lot more focused on the future and how do I kind of see me going from this point where I am right now to the future version of me, whatever that, entails. And I will say that as you travel that path, things come up, right? There's things that need to be addressed. So there is a little counseling that's going on with the coaching, because you might find that you're resisting, and you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Why am I resisting moving in this direction? Like, what's that about, right? And I call it unpacking. I unpack whatever that is in that moment. But the counseling that I've received was definitely more like present moment, something that was really, I was getting my master's degree in counseling while at West Point, and 9/11 happened. And so that was a pretty significant emotional event for many people. And I was 1 hour north of ground zero. And the counseling instructor said, if you are going to be a counselor, it's probably a good idea to get counseling so you know what it's like to be in that side of the seat. And I thought, that makes perfect sense, right? And so I did it for educational purposes, and also I was struggling with what just happened in New York City, right? So that was very present in that moment, and I was dealing it. The coach helped me prepare for my retirement and look at the things that I wanted to do after retirement. And, what were some things that I could do to sort of prepare myself for that transition? Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. So what would you say were just some of the things that you kind of like pursued that you ended up thinking about earlier that you wanted to become or be after
As I
retirement?
was retiring,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So I actually did, well, I looked at the things that I was good at. And one of the things that I have been told that I'm good at is writing. And so with the coach, we discussed different possibilities. Did I want to start a blog? Did I want to write a book? Like what were some of the avenues that I could use my writing skills in? And so she was a plethora of different resources for me to go, look, well, here's, what blogging looks like. Here's some resources. And if you were going to blog and you needed a website, well, there's, here's some resources on setting up a website to blog from. And so I found that she had a lot of really neat resources for me to kind of explore how I might use this talent that I have, that I haven't. I mean, I certainly used it in the military, but it was not my primary focus in the military, my writing skills. And so, so that's just, one example of things that I looked at.
Yeah,
With,
and then that lead you to writing the book chapter, and if you could give people
sure.
information about
Yeah,
that.
it absolutely
Yeah,
did.
writing.
One of the things that I learned a long time ago, and I always, told my soldiers, if you want to grow, one of the best ways to do that is get out of your comfort zone. Do something a little that stretches you a little bit more than what you are comfortable with. And so I did actually join a writing group of women that I did not know. It was all done virtually. And I just started to tell some stories, mostly from active duty, but some from my childhood. And each time I wrote a story, we would each read, whatever we wrote, and we would provide feedback. And I always received feedback around this idea of, wow, I didn't know that about the military. You are humanizing the military by the way that you're writing about it. And so, just by sort of getting out of my comfort zone and joining this group of women that I didn't know and started to write stories, I received feedback, and then I gained a little more confidence, like, oh, there are people out there that would be interested in reading what I have to say, and so yeah, that was definitely one of the avenues that she helped sort of coach me to, by just planting the seed. Well, have you considered joining a writing group? And I was like, a writing group? What's a writing group? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's huge. I would say that, being a psychoanalyst, yeah, that wouldn't be like something that we would really focus on in therapy
Right.
session. It may come up here and there, but not as you described it. So I see now kind of like the distinctions that you're talking about, and the value in that. And I could understand why maybe the VA might uh have it within themselves to add coaching
Coaches.
in their different yeah, in their
Yeah.
different facilities, and so that's great. And yeah, so uh, as far as looking at like where you're like, what other projects are you involved in?
So in that vein of sort of getting out of my comfort zone, during COVID, one of my girlfriends who survived I can't believe it's going to be 10 years, Boston Marathon bombing. She was 15 feet from the second bomb, I believe, that went off. No, the first one. I take that back. The first one. She, if you looked at her physically, didn't have any, broken bones or anything like that. She was knocked unconscious. When she came to, she was cognizant enough to get out of the area. And as she was getting out of the area, the second bomb went off. And she did eventually make her way to a hospital. And while she was there, got a very clear internal message that she needed to check herself out of the hospital and figure out other natural ways to heal herself. And she listened to it, and she left against the doctor's thoughts about it. And like she says, if you were to look at her that day, you would not have seen any of her injuries. But she was having trouble walking, and then there was also a tremendous amount of trauma that came up. It triggered some childhood trauma that she had suppressed, and also that day, what she saw that day. And so through chiropractic care and through massages and through meditation, through acupuncture, she chose a different modality to heal herself. And during COVID, she was called to make a movie about it. And so I became an executive producer on that movie. And
So Spielberg here also, gosh, that's great.
so
Awesome.
I had to
Yeah.
go look up what executive producer meant when she
Yeah.
asked me. So executive producer is the person who invests in the movie. I didn't know that, but it was a whole different world that I was not at all familiar with, and I learned so much from it. And it was a lot of fun to be a part of the project. And we got to travel to like where her chiropractor, lived, and got to interview the chiropractor that helped her. And one of her goals was to go back the next year. I can't say it was one of her goals, but the survivors are all given a bib. They can come back to the marathon each year. And she decided that her goal would be to walk as far as she could walk. And she made it to mile 9 a year later. And
Wow.
so, and then she eventually went back and ran the entire marathon. And then she wrote a book about that. And that's kind of what the movie is about, is that whole journey. And
What's
so
the name?
it was just a great project to be a part of.
Yeah. What's the name of the movie?
There's Got to Be More to Life.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. That's quite the story. And that leads me to ask you, how do you, from that experience of being a part of this movie project and your own, working with troops and being officer who rose the ranks and all this, and just being in counseling troops and all that, how do you feel like from this survivor's perspective of unconventional or asymmetrical ways of healing, how do you think they can fit in regards to the veteran like readjustment process?
There's so many modalities, and I guess I would say, based on my personal experience and watching my friend and her journey, I guess my advice is try it. Like if you've tried other things and they haven't maybe resonated, then there's so many other opportunities and things.
That's a general advice. That's just
That's a
general.
general advice.
Yeah.
That's a general advice.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
So
I
go
have a
ahead.
dear friend
Yeah.
who was a
Yeah.
cadet when
Yeah.
I was at West Point. So I was her tactical officer. I met her when she was 18. She's now in her 40s, and she is the co-founder of Operation Shockwave in Arizona. And its whole purpose is to find holistic methods. One of her methods is alpaca your trauma, and you go on alpaca walks with veterans, right? She's introduced the breathing technique that I mentioned. She does ice baths. So she just opens the opportunities for veterans to try different modalities.
Yes.
And she just presents them, and whether they take them is up to them, whether they pursue them is up to them, but she just searches for different modalities, and there's many of them, and I think it's worth exploring.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's interesting. These are all invitations. They're
Right.
all on the pursuit
Absolutely.
towards wellness. Yeah, they're all suggestions. And
Absolutely.
fantastic, fantastic. The alpaca I'm interested in. I love me some alpacas. There's some up like on near Mount Kisco or something, I think, right off the train stop. I noticed
Oh,
that. I was like going to eat, and then I
okay.
was like, I noticed that they were like hanging out like at some little farm thing near the main street there. So they seem really cool. I won't promise I won't turn them into boots or anything like that. So
No,
nope,
no.
nope, nope, nope. So yeah, so this has been great. How can people know about the chapter? I read the book chapter. I liked it. I think it did embody the different things that you said, because we have folks that aren't on active duty, or they just recently left the service, and they may want to get something in regards to going into the mindset of transitioning, right, from military to civilian. I thought it was well written. And so where can folks maybe find that? And also maybe, if they're interested, I don't know if you offer life coaching or anything, you could just share like any type of information
Sure,
that you want to share that can
sure.
definitely deepen the experiences of our audience.
Absolutely. So the book is Turning Point Moments. It's an anthology of 41 different turning point moments from 41 different perspectives. And mine happens to be one, and it says the name of it is Say Yes to You. And so that is available on Amazon. And it's also available at turningpointmoments.com as well, which will direct you to Amazon. And then probably the best and easiest and fastest way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. So Anela Arcari at LinkedIn, and I would be more than happy to help in any way that I could see fit. I am currently working full time for the Corps of Engineers, and I anticipate that at one point I will switch over to being a life coach.
Great. Just let me know and we'll have you on again. And I'll charge you. No, I'm kidding. No, I'll have you on, and we can talk about the different approaches, because I do think, like I said, I was exposed to it, and I liked it, when I was at teachers college doing I was helping Dr. Maltiva because in their program, they'll videotape sessions. And so I was like one of the volunteers to help the
I see.
coachees, and
Right.
a lot of the things that you had said, I noticed that that they brought up those themes. So, but you were able to kind of clarify a lot of that on this episode, and you know, we want you to come back again, and we appreciate your presence,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for being here.
So that one chapter has led to me writing my own book. So I'll come back when I finish my book.
Oh, so you're presently writing that? Yeah. So
I
you're
am.
presently writing that right
I
now.
am.
Okay.
I'm
So
just
yeah.
about to finish up the first manuscript. So yeah.
Okay. So we'll have you on when that happens. And that is
Awesome.
a great, great, great thing coming up. And
Yep.
I always love our guests because they always add more to, again, not just, warrior life, but like, the different transitions and the different nuances that kind of like unfold when you're involved in this new world called,
This journey
civilian.
called life, right?
That journey called
This
life.
journey called
Exactly.
life.
It is. It's quite the journey. And so thanks again. And
Thank you.
until next time.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Veteran Etc. invites you to join us again with your host, Mike Kim, every Sunday. If the content from this podcast is informative to you, please share the podcast with others. Give a like and/or post something you learned from the episode on social media. If interested in other truly informative podcasts like Veteran Etc., check out cominghomewell.com for a listing of other veteran-based podcasts. Thank you for tuning in.